Okay, thank you and welcome, and thank you for inviting me to present today. Today I'm going to talk about managing IoT cybersecurity risk. There are various terms for this category. When we talk about IoT, we're talking about enterprise IoT, not the smart coffee makers you might have in your home. And some people also call it OT, which stands for operational technology, which is the sensors and various automation devices that you will find in factories and energy facilities, oil and gas, etc. So the devices that we find in these environments are particularly vulnerable for a number of reasons. One, unlike the desktops and servers that you have in your data center or in your corporation, you can't put agents on these. So there's no McAfee, there's no Symantec, there's no CrowdStrike, whatever it is. You can't put agents on them, and as a result, they're typically invisible to the IT team. The IT team doesn't know what devices are connected to their network or how they're communicating, and have no idea, in fact, if they've ever been compromised. They weren't designed with security in mind. They're typically designed more about cost and functionality. They often have credentials that are either weak or have never been changed. They use a variety of open source. You can think of a camera that's built in China using open source web servers with tons of vulnerabilities. They're particularly attractive to cyber adversaries because they're often connected directly to the internet. So compromising these devices gives you direct access to the corporate network or the OT network and bypasses all of the other controls that you might have in place, like firewalls. And the number of these devices is increasing very rapidly, such that there are now 3 times more of these IoT or unmanaged IoT devices than managed devices that you have to protect in your corporation. And on the right, you'll see some examples of what I mean. Could be everything from building management systems at the top left, robotic warehouse systems at the top right, cameras we mentioned, building access controls at the bottom left, or devices in the factories themselves that are managing the production process. So the risk really can be exemplified by a couple of examples I'm going to talk to you about. You've all heard about ransomware shutting down factories. We saw last year that the Norsk Hydro facility that builds aluminum, that manufactures aluminum in Scandinavia, was shut down, losing $70 million. But we've also seen the DHS in the United States showed that a container port was infected with malware, causing downtime. And of course, the biggest incident of all, NotPetya, shutting down production at factories around the world, around food and beverage, pharmaceuticals, logistics like Maersk, and various other industries. Another example would be the safety impact of a compromise in an industrial plant. We saw the Triton cyber attack a few years ago on a petrochemical plant. It was compromised with malware that had been specifically developed to compromise the safety controllers. In other words, the controllers that are in place to shut down the plant if unsafe conditions are reached. So this is a very, this raised the awareness that we're not just talking about production downtime, we're also talking about threats to human life and to assets. 2 other examples more on the IoT side than the industrial side. We saw a campaign that Cisco announced called the VPN filter malware, where adversaries were compromising VPN routers, which are exposed to the internet on one side and to your corporate network on the other side, using vulnerabilities to install their own man-in-the-middle, MITM attacks, and packet sniffing attacks where they could sniff the traffic and inject themselves into the traffic to potentially infect standard endpoints like desktops and servers. And then the 4th example is a attack that Microsoft discovered last August, where adversaries used vulnerable voice over IP phone as well as printers and other devices to compromise the device, and then from there pivot into the corporate network looking for sensitive intellectual property. So these are all 4 examples of where IoT attacks or OT attacks lead to business risk. And then if you look at the Verizon data breach investigations report that was released just yesterday, they showed that sensitive intellectual property is a top risk for manufacturers, the theft of it. They found that more than 1 out of 4 breaches in manufacturing are motivated by cyber espionage, that nearly 4 out of 10 attacks are driven from nation states. And we're talking here about theft of formulas. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, your formulas someone's going to try to steal them. We just saw in the last few weeks, in fact, that there was various campaigns around stealing COVID-19 related research. But it could be you're designing a new automotive part. You've spent years designing it to make it as aerodynamic as possible, and then someone steals it. It could also be manufacturing processes that you might have that are proprietary. So this is, in addition to ransomware leading to downtime, in addition to safety and environmental incidents, this is yet another risk, which is theft of sensitive intellectual property. And Gartner's recently written some reports. They call this category CyberPhysical Systems. Number one, they're saying most enterprises are not even aware of what they have. So this is one problem that CyberX helps address, which is identify the devices and how they're communicating and whether they're patched or not patched. They go a step forward and say, similar to what happened with Sarbanes-Oxley about 10 years ago, governments will hold C-suite leaders personally liable if they don't focus on creating more controls around safety and security. And then finally, that all of these functions really make sense in a single organization, which is typically the CISO's organization. So even though we're talking about security in a factory, it's just as relevant to the CISO organization as protecting the databases in their data centers. So how has COVID changed what's going on here? Well, number one, we all know more employees and third-party contractors are working remotely. When I say third-party contractors, I mean firms that have been hired to manage and maintain the equipment in your factory. It's often performed by either the company that sold you the equipment or a systems integrator that put it all together. And that's resulting in more traffic to networks through something called remote desktop protocol, which is a Windows remote access protocol, but there are others like VNC and others that are being used. And as a result, the adversaries are now looking to compromise the networks using RDP as the attack vector and using weaker stolen credentials, using brute force attacks or credentials that they've purchased on dark web forums to get into your network. And they're hoping to blend into a sea of legitimate traffic because there's now a lot more traffic. And so the chances are that they can pretend to be legitimate traffic getting into your network using RDP. And if you look at this graph, it says that RDP is actually the #1 attack vector for ransomware. It's higher than phishing, higher than using 0 days or other vulnerabilities. It's actually a very popular way to get in because once you're in, you can pivot into the network and look for other sources of sensitive data. You can elevate your privileges and move to the crown jewels of the organization, you having used RDP as the way in. And then if you look at this graph, it says that the number of RDP attacks have increased dramatically. That inflection point there that you see in the middle corresponds roughly to the first week of March. And it's broken down by country, but you can see that the US rate of RDP attacks is fairly high. So how are we helping our clients address these risks using our Agentless platform? It's a network security monitoring platform that has zero impact on the network, and it monitors all of the packets on the network. So packets don't lie. Once you're monitoring the packets, you know exactly what's going on. And it also does not require any agents to be installed on the endpoints. So #1, continuous monitoring. CyberX has developed patented behavioral analytics. It looks at the behavior, doesn't look at signatures or known IOCs that change all the time. And the behavioral analytics have been developed to specifically focus on the unique characteristics of IoT and OT devices. So that delivers alerts faster, with a faster learning period and with fewer false positives. Number two, we have an in-house threat intelligence team formed by former nation state defenders. The team is called Section 52, and they're continuously monitoring both open and closed sources for new IoT campaigns, and then updating our platform as a result. They've also developed some very interesting tools using machine learning to identify campaigns. And then finally, we've been asked by several of our clients to accelerate the deployment schedule for deploying the platform at additional sites. So when the COVID-19 pandemic started, they realized that there were sites that had not yet deployed our platform that were based on a planned schedule. And they said, hey, can you come in now and deploy these? And also, can you deploy them remotely without actually getting into the plant? And of course, we've complied with those requests to give them accelerated deployments and protection in these unique times. Here's my email address. I'll be open to any questions, and thank you for your time today.